I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. Hamas says its deputy political leader was killed in an explosion in Beirut. A plane collision in Japan leaves 5 people dead and hundreds scrambling for safety from a quick-moving fire. And Moscow launches more attacks on the Ukrainian capital as Vladimir Putin vows to intensify the onslaught. Welcome to World News America. Hamas says its deputy head, Saleh al-Arawi, was killed in a blast in Beirut. Mr. Arawi was the second in command of Hamas's political arm, but it was also closely involved in military affairs. Hamas says the blast also killed 2 senior commanders from their armed wing. Israel has not taken responsibility for the attack and is not commenting, but foreign media are reporting that it was an Israeli drone strike. A senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the explosion a surgical strike against Hamas's leadership. Now, the explosion in Beirut follows an escalation in fighting on the Israel-Lebanon border. This comes as Israel announced plans to pull back some combat troops from the Gaza Strip as heavy fighting continues in the territory. And our correspondent Shaima Khalil is in Jerusalem tonight with the latest on this story for us. Shaima, thank you so much for joining us. What are the Israelis and Hamas saying about the strike in Beirut? Now, as we mentioned, the Hamas-run health ministry now says the death toll in Gaza has surpassed 22,000 since the conflict started in October. And the Palestinian Red Crescent says 5 people were killed after an Israeli bombing on the humanitarian organization's headquarters in Khan Yunis. The BBC has asked the Israel Defense Forces for comment. Israel says it will appear before the International Court of Justice after South Africa filed a case accusing Israel of engaging in genocidal acts in Gaza. Israel is calling the allegations baseless and will contest the case. Meanwhile, a bipartisan congressional delegation of U.S. senators from the Intelligence Committee will fly to the Middle East, and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand says the group will go to Israel, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia and meet with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Now, Ukraine's defense minister says Moscow is deliberately targeting residential areas after Russia hit the cities of Kyiv and Kharkiv with almost 100 missiles. Tuesday's attacks killed at least 5 people and left 250,000 people without electricity. Attacks are escalating. On Saturday, Russia launched its largest aerial attack since its invasion began, killing at least 40 people. Ukraine responded with a drone attack that killed 25 people in Belgorod, a Russian city just across the border. Ukraine struck again today after Russia's attacks, killing at least 1 person. Amid this escalating violence, there is still no end in sight to the deadlock in the U.S. Congress over funding for Ukraine's war effort. But Volodymyr Zelensky denied Vladimir Putin's claims that Kyiv's Western allies are reconsidering their support. For more on all of this, I spoke with Oksana Markarova, Ukraine's ambassador to the United States. Japanese officials are investigating an airplane collision that took place on a tarmac at Tokyo's airport. This is the moment the passenger plane skid down the runway at Haneda Airport Tuesday before a collision with a Japanese Coast Guard transport plane. People on board filmed through their panic as smoke from the engine began to fill the cabin. Although nearly 380 passengers and crew on the Japan Airlines flight were all evacuated safely, 5 Japanese Coast Guard crew that were aboard the other plane died. Passengers told the BBC what it was like inside the plane. Well, hundreds of buildings, as we saw there, have collapsed or burnt down, many of them in Wajima City. Now, Japan has seen its fair share of quakes, making it one of the most prepared countries for this type of disaster. Its last major earthquake was in 2011, its strongest and most devastating to date. Nearly 20,000 people were killed there. Since then, Japanese authorities recorded more than 30 major earthquakes, measuring level 6 or higher on the country's seismic intensity scale. Moving on to some other news now, and Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard University, stepped down today. Dr. Gay came under intense criticism after she delivered congressional testimony on anti-Semitism on college campuses and failed to say whether calling for the genocide of Jews would violate Harvard's code of conduct, saying it depended on the context. She then faced allegations of plagiarism over some of her academic papers. In a statement to alumni, Dr. Gay wrote, "It has become clear that it is in the best interests of Harvard for me to resign so that our community can navigate this moment of extraordinary challenge with a focus on the institution rather than any individual. And Dr. Gay became the second university president to testify in Congress over anti-Semitism concerns to resign following University of Pennsylvania President Liz McGill last month. All right, let's turn to some other important news from around the world now. Former President Donald Trump is appealing a decision by Maine's top elections official to disqualify him from appearing on the Republican presidential ballot there in this year's election. The Secretary of State announced her ruling last week, saying the Constitution prohibits anyone involved in an insurrection from holding office. Republicans are appealing a similar ruling in Colorado by the state's highest court, though he will remain on the ballot there for now, unless the U.S. Supreme Court does intervene. The White House is asking the Supreme Court to allow Border Patrol agents to remove razor wire that Texas placed along its border with Mexico. A federal appeals court temporarily blocked the Biden administration from destroying the fence. Now the administration wants the highest court to weigh in. It is the latest in a dispute between the White House and Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott, who had the razor wire installed to deter illegal migration. Panama says 500,000 people crossed through the dangerous Darien Gap jungle as they attempted to reach the U.S.-Mexico border. That number is more than double the previous year. The Darien Gap is the only link between South and Central America. In the U.S., the Biden administration says his country is facing an unprecedented migration crisis. And the FBI is investigating a New Year's Day crash in Rochester, New York that killed 2 people and injured at least 9 more. An SUV filled with gas canisters appeared to intentionally crash into another vehicle just outside a concert venue on Monday. The suspect, a 35-year-old man, also died in the incident. Police in Rochester say no link to terrorism has been found. And before we go, a British Army officer already holds 2 records for Antarctic trekking. Now she's set for a 3rd. Captain Preet Chandi, also known as Polar Preet, believes she's become the world's fastest woman to complete a solo South Pole ski expedition, covering more than 1,100 kilometers of Antarctic ice in just 31 days, 13 hours, and 19 minutes. Now she is waiting for the Guinness World Records to verify her feat. A very impressive feat at that. All right, congratulations to her. I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington. Thank you so much for watching BBC World News America. Don't forget that you can find the very latest on all of our headlines on our website, bbc.com/news. Do stay with us.
Hello. The weather is looking very unsettled across large swathes